Welcome to CUTV's first interview this academic year. I'm very excited to interview Afua Hirsch, who I think needs no introduction. I want to start off by finding out what lessons you would tell to your younger self.
Well, in a way, that's a really broad question because a lot of the work I do is primarily, I think, if I'm honest, inspired by a desire to reach my younger self and to make it easier for somebody in the position I was in growing up who's trying to navigate race and identity existing in a world where race has been so weaponized, but the reality of that is not something that's spoken about or acknowledged, and how you as a young person coming up in that lived experience without the tools to understand it, how you can really navigate that life. So in a way, everything I do is informed by my desire to reach my younger self or to speed up the conversations that another generation will have, just as I've been sped up by a generation before me.
Yeah.
So I think it's that legacy of just kind of asking the questions, doing the intellectual labor of understanding and unpicking the reality, and then trying to hand it on in a way that's meaningful is the whole point of everything that I do, really.
And looking on to that point, who are your inspirations and have they changed from when you were younger?
I think when I was younger, I was informed a lot by African American writers. I think literature and music played a huge part in my racial awareness and education. And I still hugely credit writers like Toni Morrison, you know, hip hop, kind of like the conscious hip hop of the 80s and 90s really informed my worldview. Reggae, I used to listen to a lot of Back to Africa reggae, and you know, kind of a lot of those Rastafarian or Garveyite concepts really informed my political education. I think now I am influenced more by Black British thinkers and academics because there are more, and I think that's really positive that we're nowhere near critical mass, but there is now like more than one book at a time examining the history of Britain in a way that includes the essential role of Black people, of Africa and Asia. And I think also that I've become more, as I've had to self-educate, more aware of people like Paul Gilroy, for example, who I wasn't aware of when I was at school, or Stuart Hall. So that intellectual legacy that's kind of hidden from mainstream education is something that I had to work to find, really. And I think I feel really strongly as well that we haven't made very much progress in that respect, that a kind of young person just relying on their mainstream education to educate them about the work that's already being done is being deprived of that knowledge, which is really frustrating because what's the point in doing the work if it's not accessible to people? And not just people of colour, not just Black or mixed heritage or people of African descent growing up in this country. Everybody needs to know this. It's fundamental to understanding the nation that we inhabit, the identities that we have, and it needs to be centred into our education.
And do you feel that that sort of inspires your writing, you know, allowing people to understand these important issues and have these discussions?
Absolutely, and the challenge for me as a writer and as a journalist and as a storyteller is how to make those narratives accessible, because it's one thing saying that it should be included, it should be part of the canon, it should be part of the curriculum, but the challenge for someone in my position is also how to make it accessible, how to make it compelling, how to preach beyond the choir, which is something that I think is easy to forget, you know, when you're a Guardian columnist as I am, or you make documentaries for BBC Two and Channel 4 as I do. I think it's great that there is an audience that is receptive and engaged, but it's often a self-selective audience. And I want to reach people who aren't already having those conversations. And that is a challenge that, you know, I continue to address. And I think it also pushes me to get more creative in the ways I work, which I really embrace.
Yeah. I mean, you have an amazing career. I was wondering, you know, did you ever think that you would end up, you know, being a Guardian columnist, for example? You know, you've done a variety of different things.
I have done a variety of different things. I've actually recently acquired a new name for it, which is media multi-hyphenate, which I love. Americans are really good at naming these things. They often do it before we do. I think it was probably a dream of mine from quite a young age to be a Guardian columnist, because I used to read The Guardian and I really admired writers. And even people like Gary Young, who are kind of like a half generation before me, who I just so admired, still so admire. So yeah, I've been, I guess, very intentional in a way about like manifesting the things that I visualized, and that is something that I'm profoundly grateful for, that I've been able to do that. I've also done lots of different things, and I think the message I often want to pass on is that I think there's a huge pressure now on students, people at like the beginning of their career, that they need to work out what they're trying to be and become it. And it didn't work like that for me. I always pursued the thing that I felt strongly a sense of purpose about at the time. So for example, I wanted to work on the African continent. I did. That led me to a sense that I wanted a vocation, and that led me to becoming a lawyer, and being a lawyer led me to becoming a journalist, and I became a legal correspondent, and being a legal correspondent led me to becoming a West Africa correspondent. That led me to becoming a TV journalist, which led me to becoming somebody who presents documentaries and creates content. And you know, like one thing leads to another, but the thread is that I was always trying to tackle a problem and find an answer. So I think that you have to also give yourself the latitude to follow the thing that feels right at the time, knowing that it can take you in a direction that you're meant to go on eventually.
Yeah, and the last question I have for you is, you know, considering how many things you've accomplished, you know, do you ever feel imposter syndrome?
All the time, all the time. I don't think I have ever got to the stage where I'm in a comfort zone. I think that's, I feel conflicted about that. On the one hand, I think that's good because I've challenged myself at every stage of my career. So for example, now I'm comfortable presenting TV or doing live TV debates or current affairs TV, but now I'm going into creating drama, TV drama, which is a completely new area for me. And again, I find myself at the beginning of a very steep learning curve. So I think it's good to challenge yourself. I was a judge on the Booker Prize, and I've never read as much as I did. I had to read 150 books in essentially 6 months. And again, you feel like these huge institutions that you grew up not associating with anyone who looked like you, which is the reason for doing it at the same time as inevitably making you question your legitimacy, your entitlement to be there. And I think that is a reflection on why it's important to be there. We need to change the institutions, we need to change the perception of who belongs in them, who owns the narrative. And so I put myself there hoping that maybe you wouldn't second guess whether you have a right to be a Booker judge, because Booker judges look like we do, and that's important as well. But I think it's even having a name for something makes a difference. And when I was at university, I went to Oxford, I didn't know about imposter syndrome. I just experienced it, and I genuinely thought I was the only one, and I genuinely thought I would be found out. And you know, if I'd have known that it was a phenomenon that other people also experience, I think it would have given me better tools to handle it. So I think that that is progress, not that we've overcome the problem, but that we've got better at naming the problem. And in a way, that's like a very baby step, but it's necessary and not sufficient.
Thank you very much.